Mm.
You can understand the desire. They're trying to make the package desirable or accessible to the majority of first-home buyers. So there's something like 92% of first-home buyers are going to be eligible to buy a Kiwi-built house. So, admirable in spirit, but if you sit and you think about what you're trying to do in regard to in government, if you're trying to reduce what's called a market failure or an intervention, you're better off to be targeting those sort of most in need. And those most in need, to be perfectly honest, I don't think of those people in 180,000.
Thank you for your thoughts, Cameron. Cameron Bagri on the panel. One more topic to go. New Zealand's red meat exporters are chasing higher prices, which means that some New Zealanders are being priced out of the meat market. Plant-based proteins starting to give meat a run for its money. Lamb and beef becoming more pricey to distance themselves from the alternatives. Has either of you tried a meat alternative?
In years gone by, I've had vegetarian friends who invite me around to their barbecues and insist that their patties are tasty. I think the things have got a lot better since then, though. I hope so.
The question is, with New Zealand's economic livelihood at stake, why is our meat being undermined by our national carrier? New Zealand First primary industry spokesperson Mark Patterson says Air New Zealand promoting a meat-free burger to business-class passengers is tone-deaf to the rural community. National's Nathan Guy is agreeing with him. Air New Zealand should be showcasing the best of our produce, including our red meat. Marva.
I read a great tweet that said, listen, if you're not brushing your teeth with lamb, you're a traitor. It's just the truth of it, isn't it?
I mean, it's also outrageous that Air New Zealand would dare serve soft drinks and water. I mean, that's really tone deaf to our amazing wine industry, isn't it? I mean,
exactly.
Sort of meat and booze should be compulsory if you've got to call yourself Air New Zealand.
That's right.
We're not air political correctness, are we?
So you don't care about Air New Zealand serving a vegetarian burger?
No. I mean, it's total gimmick. It's only on two flights, and it's an option rather than like this isn't being shoved down anyone's throat.
No, it's not. And why shouldn't people who are vegetarian have a vegetarian option? That's a good vegetarian option. And I mean, I was vegetarian for 10 years. I would never be in a position to order that off the menu. What is it, business premier? Maybe? So it wouldn't be something I would be getting. But
you see, I didn't ask you about your meat preferences because you had mentioned wrapping up meat earlier and I just assumed you were a meat eater.
But remember I said, do they even wrap it up? They should have given it away that I don't know a lot about meat. I don't eat a lot. I was vegetarian for a long time, no longer vegetarian, but I think it's great that they've put an excellent non-meat option. I think it's bizarre that they're being criticised for that.
To give you an idea of the opportunities there are for genuine pie in the sky, not pretend pie and pretend burger, I just thought I'd finish with this little tidbit because it fascinated me, but you may not fascinate you. There can be how many planes in the sky on any one day, do you think? We've just set the record for the world, apparently.
Well, I suspect the record will be set fairly regularly given the increase in air travel.
I guess so. It was set on June 29th.
What's your guess then, Matt?
Tens of thousands?
Me too. Tens of thousands. 100,000.
202.
Yes.
202,000 planes. Busiest air travel days, Thursdays, Fridays. 202,157 flights crisscrossing the Earth in any one day.
Sounds dangerous.
That's a lot of planes, isn't it? It's a lot of burgers.
It's quite remarkable how that's basically gone from sort of 120 odd years ago to that many now.
Absolutely. Matt Nippert, thank you. And Marva Anoka, thank you very much. Come back. And that's us.
Tō te mara e hoa mai hei kōrero kei te haere hei kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Tonight on Checkpoint, if you're a first-time home buyer with a combined household income south of 180,000, you're now eligible to apply for a Kiwi-built home. Figures released to us exclusively under the Official Information Act reveal that just 20% of the tip-offs the MSD received about benefit fraud, were found to be legitimate. A race against time in Thailand to free a junior soccer team from a flooded cave before the monsoon rains. 4 parishes in Christchurch cut ties with the Anglican Church over its position on same-sex marriage. Politicians with a beef over Air New Zealand's plant-based burger. And England win a penalty shootout. Really? They did.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat in aho. The Housing Minister says requiring people to ballot for Kiwi-built homes will ensure those on lower incomes still have a good chance. The National Party says the fact a couple earning up to $180,000 can even be in the running is an admission of failure for a scheme that was supposed to help low and middle income New Zealanders. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
In releasing the eligibility criteria for Kiwi-built homes, the government set the income caps at $120,000 for an individual and $180,000 for couples. Prospective buyers must also be New Zealand citizens or permanent residents and intend to own and live in the house for at least 3 years. The Housing Minister, Phil Twyford, says 3 years is not too onerous.
It's Goldilocks. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. We just think 3 years is just about right.
National's Amy Adams says the minister's being flippant.
I think it's incredibly dismissive when you're spending billions of dollars of money that we're now governing by nursery rhyme.
Unless people are buying off the plan, they'll go into a ballot for the chance to buy a house. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
And within hours of this morning's Kiwi Build announcement, New Zealanders were registering in their thousands for the First Home Buyers scheme. Just released figures show the Ministry of Social Development receives around 9,000 allegations of benefit fraud each year, or about one every hour. The figures have been obtained by Checkpoint and were released under the Official Information Act. Of the 9,000, around 2/3 are investigated, and in 20% of cases, an overpayment that needs to be paid back is identified. MSD is refusing to say whether it checks the motives behind allegations of fraud, despite a recent case which took 8.5 years to resolve, involving a woman who was wrongly accused by an abusive ex-partner. Checkpoint will have more on this story after the news. Rescuers in Thailand have released a new video of the children's football team trapped deep inside a flooded cave system. The 12 boys and their football coach were found perched on a ledge inside the Tam Luang cave, where they've been trapped by floodwaters for 9 days. The BBC's Nick Beak reports.
The video on the Thai Navy SEAL Facebook page shows the team draped in foil to keep them warm. At times, they smile for the camera. One by one, the players introduce themselves and declare they are in good health. In another video, you see the name and emblem of the Navy unit now with the boys. It's been sketched on the rock, along with the words 13 lives. Rescuers are now considering how best to bring the group to safety. Officials say they will take no risks in freeing the 12 boys and their coach.
The BBC's Nick Beak. The long-running legal saga between Jordan Williams and the former Conservative Party leader Colin Craig has now moved to the Supreme Court. In a judgment issued today, the country's highest court has granted leave for Mr Craig's appeal and Mr Williams' cross-appeal. Sarah Robson has more.
The appeals stem from a Court of Appeal ruling earlier this year. That ruling reinstated a High Court jury's 2016 verdict that Mr Craig defamed Mr Williams at a news conference and in a leaflet distributed to 1.6 million households around the country in July 2015. But the Court of Appeal said the original amount awarded in damages, almost $1.3 million, was excessive. It ordered a retrial on the amount the jury awarded in damages to Mr Williams. But Mr Craig appealed that to the Supreme Court and Mr Williams filed his own cross-appeal. Ko Sarah Robson, aho.
The government has revealed that the country's largest Polytechnic is expecting further multi-million-dollar losses and may require a commissioner. The Tertiary Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says the institute is in extreme financial difficulty and needs urgent assistance. The institute lost $50 million over the past 2 years, and that figure will grow to nearly $100 million by the end of next year. Chris Hipkins says the Tertiary Education Commission has started 5 days of consultation about replacing Unitec's council with a commissioner. He says a commissioner may be needed to give the government stronger oversight of Unitec's operations. One of the country's longest-running calf and lamb shows has fallen victims to Mycoplasma bovis. Manawatu's Championship Day has been held every spring since 1930, but this year the risk of spreading the disease has resulted in a ban on calves. The president of the Manawatu Oroa Boys and Girls Agricultural Club, Judy Driscoll, says Championship Day is a quintessential part of life for children in the region.
It's a really big commitment for them from July right through to November, because these children pick their animals quite often in these coming holidays. some children, they have a name first and then they go and find the animal to suit that name, or, it's just amazing.
Judy Driscoll. Cattle sections have also been cut from AMP shows at Ellesmere in mid-Canterbury, Ashburton, Southland and the Mackenzie district. 2 people have been critically injured after a serious crash near Otaki River Bridge on State Highway 1 this afternoon. 1 person has been airlifted to Palmerston North Hospital and another to Wellington Hospital. State Highway 1 is closed and motorists are advised to avoid the area if possible. It's 5:05. Sport. England's footballers won't succumb to the pressure of history, says manager Gareth Southgate, after his side advanced to the World Cup quarter-finals with a penalty shootout win over Colombia. It's England's first shootout win at a World Cup after defeats in 1990, 1998 and 2006. They'll now play Sweden in the quarter-finals on Sunday morning. Southgate says the win shows they haven't become fixated by previous World Cup disappointments and they'll need the same mindset come the weekend.
We're trying to write our own history, and I've talked to the players about that. They write their own stories. We don't have to be bowed by the pressure of the past, and now we have a tough challenge because we're high as a kite and we've got 3 days to prepare for a really tough game, because our record against Sweden is another one that isn't good.
England has beaten Sweden in just 1 of their last 8 encounters. The Crusaders prop Wyatt Crockett will make rugby history this week when he becomes the first player to chalk up 200 Super Rugby appearances. The former All Black prop has been named in the Crusaders' starting lineup for the match against the Highlanders in Christchurch on Friday night, the same side he made his debut against in 2006. The Christchurch-born prop became the most capped Super Rugby player of all time in April last year when he broke Kevin Mialamu's record of 175 games. And the Silver Ferns have dropped to their lowest ever place in netball's world rankings. They now sit 3rd, with England having moved into 2nd spot while Australia retained the top ranking. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the case against Gail Manley continues to unravel in episode 8 of Gone Fishing. We've got a sofa session with Girl Boss performing live in the studio, and Melody Thomas looks at pre-European sex in Bang, as in sex before the missionaries and their position on sex arrived.
I shouldn't really ask you who you're looking for, but perhaps we could put it out there. We could have a dating program on lately, as in, what are the attributes that you're looking for in a partner, Josh?
I'm looking for someone who loves me for me.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, weeknights at 10 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland mainly fine but cloudy periods and the odd shower about the west coast. Waikato to Kapiti, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty in the central high country, fine apart from areas of morning fog. Overnight frosts in sheltered places. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Waiata Upper and Wellington, fine today. Cloudy periods tomorrow with a few light showers about Gisborne and northern Hawke's Bay. For Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and North Otago, fine today. Mostly cloudy tomorrow. Bulla and Westland mainly fine today, occasional rain or drizzle developing tomorrow. Central Otago, Dunedin, Clutha and Southland often cloudy with some rain or showers at times. For Fiordland, periods of rain and the Chatham Islands, a few showers, more frequent for a time tomorrow with southwest gales. It's coming up to 5:09 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks very much, Katrina, and thanks everyone for being with us. We're going to begin with the eligibility rules for buying a Kiwi-built home. They have, of course, been revealed. The government's already being forced to defend the fact couples earning up to $180,000 can be in the running for them. The income caps are $120,000 for sole purchases, $180,000 for couples. National says that's an admission of failure for a scheme that was supposed to help low and middle income New Zealanders. Prospective buyers must also be New Zealand citizens, permanent residents, or those who ordinarily reside in New Zealand and who intend to own and live in the house for at least 3 years. Looking at all of this for us is our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Kiwi Build is one of the coalition government's flagship policies, with an ambitious aim to build 100,000 houses over the next decade. There's been plenty of debate about exactly how the government will build so many houses, and now it's about who can buy them. The Housing Minister Phil Twyford says there are plenty of people earning more than $100,000 who can't afford to buy in Auckland, where the average price is $1 million.
One of the things about the housing market is that only 5% of new builds are in that lower quartile range that first home buyers, even on quite good salaries, could afford to buy. We've set the price caps so that the eligible group would include 92% of first home buyers currently.
The government will require prospective homeowners to sign statutory declarations about their personal circumstances to make sure they're not breaking the rules. Mr Twyford says that includes situations where people may have owned a house in the past or have sizeable assets in a family trust.
So you have to basically sign a statutory declaration and you have to basically declare your income limits. So all of those kind of systems are already in place, for example, through the Home Start program. So I'm very confident we can put a procedure in place that will deal with that.
In Parliament, Nationals finance spokesperson Amy Adams asked the Finance Minister Grant Robertson about the level set for the top income threshold.
Why is the income cap for Kiwi-built houses set at more than double the average household income, given his stated commitment to help younger generations in middle New Zealand?
Mr Speaker, because the need is great, because the housing crisis has reached so far that those earning a combined household income of $180,000 are struggling to buy their first home.
Ms Adams asked what that would mean for lower income earners, who will be competing with higher earners in a ballot for the Kiwi-built houses.
So does he consider it fair then that those on middle and lower household incomes will be competing with people like members of Parliament and senior public servants on an equal footing?
Mr Speaker, I'm not sure if that would quite work for members of Parliament, given where their combined income might reach. But the truth is that a ballot is the fairest way of dealing with this.
Undeterred, Amy Adams put it to Mr Robertson that the government's abandoned any hope of helping out lower income New Zealanders.
Isn't his announcement of a Kiwi-built income cap of $180,000, which makes more than 90% of first home buyers eligible for the 1,000 Kiwi-built homes he hopes to build this year, nothing more than an admission that he can't deliver affordable houses to lower and middle income families and has had to widen the market to try and ensure Kiwi build doesn't become Kiwi flop?
Absolutely not, Mr Speaker. What it is an admission of is the scale of the housing crisis in New Zealand.
The government has pledged to deliver 1,000 Kiwi-built homes in the first year, 5,000 by June 2020 and 10,000 by June 2021. This week marks the official start of the Kiwi Build program, where homes built under the scheme will count towards those targets. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
13 minutes past 5. The government receives 9,000 allegations of benefit fraud a year. That's one an hour every day. And of the 9,000 tip-offs they receive from other New Zealanders, 20% were found to have legitimacy. There's an anonymous 0800 tip line and an online form. It's easy to dob someone in and there's no comeback if it's not true. The reason benefit fraud is a waste of taxpayer money. But one of the country's leading lawyers says what may be a greater waste of taxpayer money is how many of these allegations are investigated, at length sometimes, and found to be false. Frances Joychild says this adds to the stress and anxiety of some of our most vulnerable people, many of whom are wrongly accused. Here's Zach Fleming.
We have got to change the system. The way beneficiaries are being treated is close to sadistic.
Strong words from a woman who's seen firsthand the Ministry of Social Development's bad side. Today, Frances Joychild QC is referring directly to allegations of benefit fraud. Figures released exclusively to Checkpoint under the Official Information Act reveal MSD received nearly 9,000 allegations in the 2017 financial year. Two-thirds, nearly 6,000, were investigated, and of the 9,000, only 20%, or 1,800, were found to be valid. This means 4,200 people who did nothing wrong were subjected to an MSD investigation and cleared.
So many resources being put into people with a gripe about anything, dobbing in these vulnerable people and subjecting them to the misery of an MSD benefit fraud investigation.
Those 4,200 people are clear evidence the motives of the accusers need to be scrutinised, Ms Joychild says. because when they're not, it can result in 8.5 years of hell.
It took 8 years for me to have an impartial hearing through all of my experience with WINS, with case managers, with the Benefits Review Committee, with the National Fraud Investigation Unit, with the Social Security Appeal Authority. I was constantly facing a Goliath who had no interest in listening to me.
An abusive ex-partner dobbed in this woman, who can only be identified as Miss F because she has name suppression, to MSD's benefit fraud line.
And he later apologised and acknowledged that they were all lies that he'd told. But that had absolutely no impact on MSD. They got the allegation and they went for it.
Went for it all the way to the High Court, arguing that the loans Miss F got to pay her bills counted as income. MSD claimed she owed more than $100,000. The High Court yesterday plainly said it was wrong, ruling that loans are not income because they have to be paid back.
He made 2 false allegations, and I've looked at the file notes on these, created a story that he was at a market and he was watching her all day and she seemed to be earning a lot of money and he was just a taxpayer worried about taxpayers' money. And another one that he'd heard through a friend that this woman was buying and selling houses for profit. And all the time it was him. It was obvious when you looked at it that this person had a personal gripe.
And to your knowledge, did they ever look into his personal reasons for alleging the fraud?
Never, never. Didn't ask, just took everything he said at face value, then used the enormous resources of the benefit fraud unit to launch into this person and turn her life into hell.
The Ministry of Social Development wouldn't front for an interview today. In a statement, it said most of the allegations it receives are anonymous, so motive can't be explored. But it refused to answer whether it explores motive for allegations that aren't anonymous. Miss F is not an isolated case. Miss Joychild says she has another client who was accused of benefit fraud by a man her daughter had accused of sexual assault. And
another person also, once again in a very violent relationship, the partner came and went as he pleased, refused to contribute a cent to her child. She had no other choice but to get the benefit. And he dobbed her in as soon as he got with another woman. It is not uncommon at all.
Then, if MSD decides they owe money, a long, hard fight is required to prove otherwise. Miss Joychild has been contacted by several people since her victory in the High Court, including one advocate who...
He had successfully managed to waive an $86,000 debt that wasn't justified.
So here we have 2 recent cases, together worth nearly $200,000, where had the accused rolled over, they'd likely be in debt for the rest of their lives, because remember, these are beneficiaries. In debt for the rest of their lives when they shouldn't be.
It's time for this government to do a complete independent review of all the debts. It's got to be done by external people. That's the problem, that there's not enough external accountability with this department.
If not that, Checkpoint asked MSD if it would at least look to find historical cases where overpayments had been found due to loans, in light of yesterday's High Court ruling. MSD didn't answer the question. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Yes, we will keep trying to get an interview with MSD about all of this. It's 5:18 to Thailand now, where rescuers are organising small and extra small full face masks with a view to getting 12 schoolboys and their soccer coach out of the cave where they've been trapped for 11 days. A team of Navy SEALs are teaching them all to scuba dive so they can attempt to lead them to safety through a 2K stretch of the cave that's narrow and flooded in many parts ahead of monsoon rains, which are due later in the week and may not stop for a long time. In a moment, we'll speak to one of the international team of divers involved in the rescue mission. It's a remarkable interview about life inside the caves. But first, here's Bridget Burke, a new video footage of the team released this afternoon.
One by one, each of the 12 children in the wild boar football team gives a rescuer their name and delivers a short message or prayer for family members keeping vigil outside. New video footage has emerged of the boys aged between 11 and 16 and their 25-year-old coach on their 11th day underground. Wrapped in emergency thermal blankets for warmth and sipping on energy gels and protein drinks, The team are now sharing their elevated rock in a cabin 2 kilometres inside the Tam Luang cave complex with 7 members of the Navy SEAL team and medics. The boys, who left their bicycles and shoes at the entrance of the cave on June 23rd, have had the cuts and bruises on their legs treated as they regain their energy in preparation for what will be a difficult journey navigating their way home. Outside the cave, relieved mothers gather in a tent, delighted to see more footage of their sons. A phone line is being installed so the boys will be able to communicate with their parents directly and is expected to be operational in the coming hours. Meanwhile, an international rescue plan is underway with divers hoping to teach the team, who cannot swim, how to scuba dive in an attempt to get them out before heavy monsoon rain expected later this week. Australian Police Officer Peter Southwell is among those helping.
The AFP has 6 specialist divers from the Specialist Response Group. Now our divers are bringing a capability of enclosed spaces and also low light, low visibility diving. We're working in a capacity to assist the Royal Thai Navy as they push forward within their operations.
If a dive rescue is not possible, the boys face a wait of months underground until monsoon rains end and the water recedes in September. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
Jonathan Head is the BBC's correspondent at the caves. Just before we came on air, he told me the decision about whether to wait out the rains or try to move before them does now appear to be swinging towards imminent action.
I don't think they can decide, at least they're not telling us they have, because the options are so difficult. None of them is ideal. We don't know how the discussions among themselves and the Thai authorities are going. I would say that they're moving more towards the idea of getting them out quickly. It was interesting at today's briefing, they simply assured everyone they were not going to try to get them out today. But nobody's talking about just leaving them there now. Now, that may change again. The reality is the rainy season has just started. When it really gets going, I don't think anybody knows quite how flooded these caves are, but it could make it almost impossible to stay down there. And they've been asking for these full-face masks, which are easier for beginner divers to wear. I mean, these kids, they're right up in the north of Thailand, a long way from the sea. They've not only never done diving or had any kind of diving training, some of them can't even swim. So there's a very big worry about trying to bring them back through this very difficult route that it took experienced divers days to make their way through. Particularly the narrow tunnels, would they panic? It could be very dangerous for everybody, including the divers who would accompany them. But they're strong lads. We've seen a video of them today that the Thai Navy has posted, the ones who've been staying with them. They're all smiling and greeting the camera and telling the camera that they're in good health, or at least 11 of them say that. People feel that they're, at least certainly the medics say, there's a good chance they'll recover their strength fairly quickly. They may have some very tough decisions. We're getting heavier rain where we're expecting it today. It's very sunny at the moment, so that can change very fast at this time of year. They may just decide we've got to do this. They've clearly got to give the boys some kind of training in very difficult conditions where they are. They've not yet managed to get a phone line through to them, which they wanted to do because that would boost their morale. I doubt they've got power through yet, and the relaying of Thai Navy divers, even through to stay with them with supplies, it's a difficult route. So, these are tough options, and we don't know yet which one I suspect they're looking at both of them. If they can't get them through, they're certainly taking a great many supplies down there with the thought they may have to look after them for quite a long time.
Gosh, it's a terrible dilemma, isn't it? And the real unknown here is that space they are in, where they are able to remain alive. Does that get flooded at the height of the rainy season? And no one knows the answer to that question.
Well, one of the interesting aspects is that this area known as Pattaya Beach, which is the area the divers were heading for, was thought to be dry. And in fact, when they got to it, it was flooded. And they found the boys about 300 metres further on, and on quite a small, higher shelf. So clearly, there isn't much very clear, there isn't very comprehensive knowledge of where the flooding goes. I think it is unpredictable. They have found another cavern they hope might be linked to the cave the boys are in, where they're actually talking about seeing if they can drain water that way. There's all sorts of discussions and thought going on about hydroengineering. They are blocking streams that they believe go into the caves as much as possible. But of course, on mountains like these, water's absorbed in all sorts of ways. They're constantly pumping water out. At this stage, it is try every option, explore every option. It seems resources, and there's no limit to the resources they'll put into it.
The BBC's Jonathan Head. Well, Ben Remenon is one of the international team of divers who was looking for the 13, a dive instructor with thousands of hours of underwater experience. He told me via Skype about being a central member of the rescue mission as they pushed deeper and deeper into the caves.
The first days was really hard, and we had very little hope. We were taking turns with the British team, And the first day we decided it's never going to work. The outflow was so strong, it was really pulling hand over hand. The visibility was zero. It was really mud flowing out. But then the rain stopped for a little while. The pumps were doing their job, and we actually could see, and then we progressed quite a bit. It was roughly 1.5 kilometers until the chamber where we presumed the kids would be. And the last days we progressed a lot, and then before yesterday, our lines ended about 400 meters from the caves. The British cavers took over from us, pushed the last stretch, and they found them. It's a miracle because we had very, very little hope, to be honest, because it was just all speculations. They could be there, they could have drowned, they could have, So luckily, the coach in the end had some sense and stayed them together in the dry and conserved their energy. And that saved him in the end, because 10 days, no food, no light, just some water dripping from the walls, and huddled together in a pile of mud.
Tell me about that journey in again. So it is dark, there is a really strong pull in the water, and sometimes it is terribly, terribly narrow, isn't it?
So there's 3 passages which are about 60 meters high, which obviously the Navy SEALs have difficulties getting through there because they're diving on a standard cylinder on their back, and they got stuck several times. Now, us and the British guys, we use a system called side mount, where we have the tanks underneath our armpits, which allowed us to pass through those sections. And we managed to pull 1.5 kilometers of thick rope to help us pulling against the currents, and we reached in the end. So it's a miracle. Also that they are all alive and all mentally surprisingly they were quite responsive.
It's absolutely wonderful. It's such great news. But as you describe the journey in, I'm thinking of them making the journey out, and the prospect of doing that is terrifying to someone like me who has no experience of scuba diving, no experience of caving, no experience of travelling in narrow spaces in the dark, and that's those children too. So is it possible, do you think, to get them out that way with the water there?
That's the biggest discussion now, and as you say, the biggest challenge is yet to come to get them out. And the opinions are very divided on what to do. There's a lot of military teams available from different countries. They brought full face masks in order to get them out, but those restrictions, they can't swim. So imagine teaching them to dive in a short time frame. There's a real risk involved over quite a stretch of cave system, and it's a maze of small tunnels. So that's one option. The hopes were that the water would reside. They put massive pumps, and they managed to drop the water with about 2 meters. They needed just another 2 meters to drop, and they could literally float the kids out with life jackets. But yesterday morning, the water started coming up a little bit again, and they're expecting heavy storms. So, which wouldn't facilitate getting them out, actually make it very, very dangerous. And then they come to the last option, which would be make them literally hibernate the monsoon until the water resides. So maybe you've heard a couple of Thai doctors volunteered to be locked up in the cave with the kids with enough food and medication to survive those 3 to 4 months.
Can I ask you about your mental state when you are in those caves, particularly when you're first in them and you don't really know where you're going or what you're going to find? How do you remain calm? Clearly that's part of your training and your experience, but how do you not panic?
You try and stay focused and don't think about the kids and don't think about it. The 12-year-old kids that have their whole life in front of them, because that would push you beyond the limits. And sometimes you just have to turn around when all the red flags go up and you're lost and it's you with your hands in the mud and you can't find another passage, or you're stuck in a crevice that you can't move. One time my buddy actually had to pull me out of a crevice by my fins because I couldn't turn around anymore. We turned around a few times. The British team turned around a few times, and we surfaced both in a sump and saying this is not going to happen. I have to tell them, yeah, this is too dangerous. But then conditions cleared up, and the rain stopped. The water cleared up. We could actually see a meter, which is a luxury in that cave system. And then we progressed a lot. We found the connection, the famous T junction where they were looking for days. We connected that, and then straight after us came the British divers. Told them, "Hey, go there, go left," and they managed to find them. So it's been a really good team effort, especially because they brought some dry caving speleo guys who knew the cave from before, and they gave some hints. They'd been there 3 times when the cave was dry. They gave hints where to go and where to turn, because I'd never been in that cave. Now they had the British cave divers, so it was really an exploration trip to trial and error.
And when the trial and error led to the kids and their coach being found, can you describe your sense of joy, I guess, elation, I suspect?
Yes. I'm not really cry, but yes, then of course it's hard to keep the tears away. And also outside, everybody was screaming and crying. I got a massive hug from the Admiral, normally a very stiff person, and we were giving luck bracelets and all these kind of things. So the joy was really there. But yeah, like I said, it was only half the work. Now the real challenge comes to get them out or to keep them alive at least.
Ben Remenon, who is one of the rescue divers who was part of the mission that ended up finding those kids a long, long way in. He's Belgian originally. His team is still in the Football World Cup. We'll have more on that coming up, but let's have the sting first. Also coming up on Checkpoint 4, Christchurch Parish has cut ties with the Anglican Church over its position on same-sex marriage. We talked to the head of the church in New Zealand. England win a thrilling penalty shootout, not a phrase that is often uttered in the history of football, to make the quarterfinals of the FIFA World Cup, and 2 Maori education leaders lodge a claim with the Waitangi Tribunal, alleging the government's decision to axe charter schools will have a detrimental effect on the students. Would love your feedback on anything we're covering tonight. 2101. You can text us at Checkpoint, so that is 2101 is what you can text us on. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Lots of texts coming in already about Zach's story on the MSD. Thank you all. 27 minutes to 6. Here with the headlines is Katrina.
Within hours of this morning's Kiwi Build announcement, thousands of people were registering for the First Home Buyers scheme. The National Party says the scheme was supposed to help low and middle income New Zealanders, but the fact that the couple earning up to $180,000 can be in the running is an admission of failure. The Housing Minister says having a ballot for Kiwi Build homes will help make sure people on low incomes still have a good chance of getting one. New figures show the Ministry of Social Development receives about 9,000 allegations of benefit fraud a year, one every hour. Only 20% of the tip-offs are found to be legitimate. The Ministry will not say whether it checks the motives behind the fraud allegations, despite a recent long-running case involving a woman wrongly accused by her former partner. The Supreme Court will hear the long-running legal saga between Jordan Williams and the former Conservative Party leader Colin Craig. In a judgment released today, the country's highest court says it has granted leave for Mr Craig's appeal and Mr Williams' cross-appeal in relation to a defamation case won by Mr Williams. The government has revealed it may appoint a commissioner to manage the country's largest polytechnic. After losing $50 million over the past 2 years, Unitec's losses are expected to grow to nearly $100 million by the end of next year. One of the country's longest-running calf and lamb shows has fallen victim to Mycoplasma bovis. Lambs will still be shown at Manawatu's Championship Day, but calves have been banned because of the risk of spreading the disease. Cattle sections have also been cut from AMP shows in Ellesmere, Ashburton and in Southland and the Mackenzie district. 2 people have been airlifted to hospital with critical injuries after a serious crash near the Otaki River Bridge this afternoon. The police were called to the 3-vehicle accident just before 3 o'clock. State Highway 1 is closed and motorists are advised to avoid the area if possible. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. So much MSD feedback coming in. Steve asks, I would like to know how many of the false accusations are made by men against women who hold protection orders against them. And then the text immediately before that says, I was investigated by the MSD fraud unit while receiving the sole parent benefit after vindictive allegations were made by a cruel ex-partner. We're getting a lot of feedback along those lines, and we will try and talk to MSD about it. We do feel they should front. Let's turn to business news now with Patrick O'Mara beaming. There you are, Patrick. Hello, joining us from Wellington. Rising business pessimism is being felt in the jobs market.
Yeah, I feel, John, we discussed this yesterday, and now we've got figures that seem to show that that is the case. This is ANZ's monthly look at the number of job ads out there. It fell a seasonally adjusted 1.6%, but perhaps more importantly, we saw the rate of growth drop from 3.9% to 2.9%. Now, look, a mixture of things, as we talked about yesterday with the business confidence survey. Partly the slowing economy, partly this concern about government policy, particularly around labour law changes that are out there, and partly, I guess, a fear of where we're going into the future. And I'll just give you one example of just with construction, for example. Now, we saw job ads there drop about 4.4%. Now, as you know, that's a sector where there is lots of demand. There was something like 14,000 jobs for the sector overall, not just construction, I hasten to add, there's other things like transport. But partly it's about just the difficulty in finding staff, and that's deterred firms from advertising. It's partly about concerns about in the industry itself, such as whether jobs can be done and the financing is there, and issues related to that. As well as possibly concerns about where the government is going with their policies overall. Now, what ANZ are saying, as we again mentioned yesterday with the business confidence survey, certainly we're expecting the economy to keep growing, and we're expecting jobs growth still, but perhaps a little bit more modest than what we've seen in the past, and really just keeping unemployment at 4.4%. It'll bump along, they reckon, at those sort of numbers. But they do sound a warning, saying that, again, if some of these downside risks that are out there, pessimism grows, firms become much more reluctant to hire, it could become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, it's precisely what we were discussing last night, isn't it? It's fascinating, all of this. Trade tensions weighing on dairy prices. This is interesting, and they're not necessarily trade tensions involving New Zealand in any way, shape or form, but they can affect what farmers are making, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And again, it really does touch on what we talked about yesterday with the Chinese markets, what we saw there with Hang Seng. Dairy prices down 5% to, on average, to around $3,200 a tonne. Whole milk price, which is kind of a key indicator for the farming sector, for those dairy farmers, that fell 7% to $2,900 a tonne. Now, partly we saw more volume going through, so of course that helped push the price down. But again, I think this is probably a story and a reflection of what we're seeing in China at the present time. Certainly demand looked like it was down there in that particular market. The yuan has also fallen, and because dairy prices are denominated in US dollars, that makes the price of it a little bit more expensive. But if you see demand down there and demand in China, which is one of our biggest markets, if not the biggest market, if that's down, it's partly a reflection too of what is happening over there. Stock market's down, nervousness about the trade tensions with the US. That seems to have had just buyers thinking twice about maybe taking any extra in their order or in fact taking any orders at all. And I guess the big question that's now going to come for farmers, is that going to hurt the payout that they get? Now, Fonterra forecast $7 a kilo of milk solids for the next season, so that's the one effectively now just started, so for this year, which finishes in May next year. will that actually start to have an impact on that? Will it actually be much lower? Now, just to put all this in context, it's still early in the season. Volumes are starting to go up, so you start to see a bit of volatility prices at the beginning of this this time of year. And look, even if the price does drop, most farmers break even, or the break-even point's around $5, $5.50. So $7 is still very strong. There's a long way to go yet. But again, just that sense of nervousness, John, out there that things are slightly not as good as what they had once been.
Thanks, Patrick. What did the markets do today?
Well, the market, it was down 28 points, 0.3% at 9,026. The dollar, it's buying 67.7 US, 91.3 Australian, 51.2 pence, John.
Patrick O'Mara joining us live from Wellington. Thank you very much indeed, Patrick. Let's turn to some sport now. The Football World Cup, of course, and all 8 quarterfinalists are now known. France will play Uruguay, Brazil will play Belgium, Russia will play Croatia, and Sweden will play England. The English, having made it after their game against Colombia, went into extra time and then to penalties. Now, penalties are England's kryptonite. England's France and Wayne Barnes in 2007. England's Achilles heel. England's... You get my drift. But not this morning. Cometh the hour, cometh the lads. And when that final penalty went in, the celebrations from English fans went global.
Awesome. Just an unbelievable feeling. Talk to him.
Fantastic game.
Yeah. Just, I can't. Amazing. An amazing game. Amazing. God, I can't even.
I literally didn't watch any of the penalties. I had my shirt over my face for every single penalty and I couldn't watch it. I don't trust England with penalties. The only person I trust is Harry Kane. And as an Arsenal fan, that burns me inside. But when it comes to England, all teams go aside. And it's just nice to see England win a penalty shootout, finally.
Finally, it really was a thrilling end to a somewhat spiteful game in parts, in which Colombia played both England and the referee, it seemed. The BBC's Dan Rowan watched the action in Moscow.
It's Tottenham against Arsenal. Dyer against Ospina. He scores! England have won the penalty shootout for the first time in a World Cup. They're through to the quarter-finals. Off they go to celebrate.
It was the moment England's penalty jinx finally came to an end. Substitute Eric Dyer's decisive kick sealing the team's first ever World Cup shootout win against Colombia and through to the quarter-finals after a night of tension in Moscow. When Jordan Henderson's effort was saved, a fourth shootout defeat at a World Cup seemed inevitable. Instead, Colombia missed the following kick, paving the way for 2 men to emerge as England heroes. Goalkeeper Jordan Pickford brilliantly denied Carlos Bacca before Dyer held his nerve and gave his side the victory they and their vastly outnumbered fans had craved. This what it meant to captain Harry Kane.
To get hit with that one in stoppage time hurt, and but no one laid on the floor, no one dropped to their knees. We stood tall and we stood there and was counted, you know. And extra time was extra time. You're tired, a couple of chances here and there, and yeah, penalties. That's what it's about, you know. You've got to stand up and deliver, and that's what we've done. So proud of each and every one of us, the boys, the staff, everyone involved. It's a big night for England.
Pickford, meanwhile, reflecting on his decisive role in England's triumph.
It's about being in the moment on the big stages, and people say I'm only young, but I've got a lot. I feel like I've got experience, and my mental side of the game helps us. And I always believe tonight I could save at least one of them penalties to help us go through, and we did. But we're a big team, and we're strong, and we believe in each other.
England's reward is a quarter-final against Sweden, with the winners taking on Croatia or Russia for a place in the final itself. Rarely will they have such a chance to reach football's greatest showpiece.
Dan Rowan in Moscow. 4 parishes in Christchurch have decided to cut ties with the Anglican Church of Aotearoa in Polynesia because they cannot accept the church's position on same-sex marriage. The decision to break away was triggered by a general synod vote in May, paving the way for individual parishes to bless same-sex marriages. Some in the church rejected that as woefully inadequate, calling it weak. But others, including St Stephen's and Shirley, St John's in Latimer Square, St Saviour's and St Nicholas of South Christchurch, and St John's of Woolston, said it had gone too far. This is a big issue for the Anglican Church, of course, and indeed for all organised religion, as country after country says yes to same-sex marriage. I spoke to the Most Reverend Philip Richardson, head of the Anglican Church in New Zealand, firstly about what the Synod decided in May.
So what the General Synod agreed was that this was a matter for the primary units of the Anglican Church, and that's actually a diocese or a region. So like the Diocese of Christchurch, which includes Canterbury, North Canterbury, South Canterbury and Westland. So it's up to each region with their bishop to make a decision about whether to allow the blessing of same-gender marriages, civil marriages, or not. And then a bishop can choose to allow a priest in a parish to offer a service of blessing on a couple who have been married under New Zealand law. So that's what has been allowed for by the General Synod when it met in May.
So just for clarity, that isn't actually a marriage, it's the blessing of a marriage that has already occurred.
It's the blessing of a civil marriage, that's right.
Okay, and if we look at what Vicar Helen is saying, it's in Matthew in the City. She's describing it as weakened and I think as pretty underwhelming. So there are some parts of the church that believe that is not strong enough.
Absolutely, and that's the spectrum of view that we have across the church, and that's the range of view that we've tried to hold together throughout this process, which has been going on now for 20, 25 years.
Do you have a personal belief, a personal feeling on all of this?
I think the church has made a good decision. I think I voted for the provision. I think this is where, by far and away, the majority of the General Synod, a significant majority, felt able to move. And I have a strong view that holding a diversity of view together in the same extended family is actually really important. So I'm very grateful for the way in which we have worked together. I'm proud of the way in which we have held that respectfully, and I think the breadth of view that we have continued to be able to hold together is a tribute to that kind of community cohesion, really.
Hold together being the operative phrase, and it looks like there's going to be an exception to that in Canterbury, where you have 4 parishes who are saying, no, we don't even accept this much. We don't want the church to bless same-gender marriages, and we are prepared to leave the Anglican Church. Is that the situation you find yourselves in?
Well, they're certainly saying that they are prepared to disaffiliate from the Diocese of Christchurch. They would say very clearly, and I respect these people and their views. They're part of my family. I know them well, and I have a great deal of respect for them individually and collectively. They're saying they want to remain Anglican, and that they want to try and find a way of doing so, but they don't believe that they can remain affiliated to the Anglican Church of Aotearoa, New Zealand and Polynesia because of this decision.
I guess the question is, you say they want to remain Anglican. I guess the question is, what is Anglican? And what does it look like? How inclusive is it? How does it respond to changes in the way society generally views the world and what society generally regards as appropriate? Same-sex marriages are now a fact of life in New Zealand. They are allowed under law and they take place far and wide. How difficult is it for the Anglican Church to continue to not reflect that?
Well, it's an extraordinarily difficult reality that we face. I mean, is the church and what it believes to be defined by society, or is it to be defined by its beliefs? And we would say it's to be defined by its beliefs. That's why it's taken us so long to work through these particular issues to find...
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but just to clarify, the church's belief is that marriage takes place between a man and a woman.
Yeah, and we reaffirmed that in 2014, that Christian marriage is between a man and a woman, and the church said very clearly in 2014 that is its central doctrine. So what the church also said in 2014 was, is there a way in which the church can recognise Anglican Christians, same-gender couples who are part of our church families, who have been civilly married, as the way of asking for God's blessing on that commitment and on that lifelong commitment.
I'm just reading your words in Anglican eLife, and you say this is a broken and painful place to be, but we need to find a way to walk through this uncharted land that is gracious, hospitable and realistic. That's a big balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, one of the huge advantages that we have in Aotearoa New Zealand, though, is that we're small, we're relational, we do know each other. And so, like in any good family, you can deal with differences as long as you keep the communication viable. And that's what we've sought to do. And, you know, I want to pay tribute to those who are at the point where they're saying, look, we simply cannot accept this decision of General Synod, and so we have to personally and individually disaffiliate from our membership of the Anglican Church.
When you say you want to pay respect to that, what about that position do you respect? What is it that you respect?
I respect the integrity of that view and that belief. They believe it genuinely. They believe that they're remaining true to the orthodox position of the Christian Church, and I respect that, and I want to maintain a relationship, although an impaired relationship, with them, and to see what the future holds as we continue to speak with each other and work with each other, while recognising that for them this has been a step too far.
It's the Most Reverend Philip Richardson, head of the Anglican Church in New Zealand. I spoke to him earlier this afternoon. Just got a quite an important media statement from the police. They're investigating the death of a man following an arrest. The arrest was on Sunday. They received multiple reports of a male violently assaulting an elderly person outside a residential address in Freeman's Bay, that's downtown Auckland. The male offender had smashed a car window of a nearby parked car and was observed kicking the victim in the head several times as he lay unconscious. A police helicopter had observations of the incident. 2 police officers arrived at the scene. The officers were unable to reach the unconscious man as the unconscious victim, as the offender was blocking them from attending to him. The officers instructed the offender to move out of the way, which he refused to do and moved aggressively towards him. Bear in mind, this is the police describing their own actions. Their repeated commands were ignored and the offender lunged towards them before he was tasered multiple times. During the arrest process, the offender violently struggled, which required 2 more backup officers to assist to apply necessary restraints and a spit hood. The offender was transported to the Auckland Police Custody Unit in an agitated state and continued resisting police efforts to remove restraints. The offender's condition began to deteriorate while in custody and police were required to perform CPR until an ambulance required. He was taken to hospital where he passed away this morning. That's police describing events, obviously, to which they were very much party. That statement just in from New Zealand Police. A man has died following being repeatedly tasered on Sunday. It's 7:30 to 6. 2 Maori education leaders have lodged a claim with the Waitangi Tribunal alleging that the government's decision to axe charter schools will have a detrimental effect on Maori students. Sir Toby Curtis and Dame Iritana Tawhiwhirangi say the decision breaches the treaty because it forces Maori out of an education model which works for them and back into a state system which has long failed them. Tumani Korahi reporter John Boyton has more.
Former teacher and chair of the Iwi Education Authority, Sir Toby Curtis, wants the best for Māori children, and he believes charter schools or kura haurua deliver that for them. 6 of the 11 schools have a Māori roll of 87% or higher.
The kura haurua are being so successful where other schools have failed. And when you have a successful operation, one should be looking at extending that operation, in my view, rather than trying to close them down.
Sir Toby says many communities are seeing the benefits of charter schools for their children, and he wants his claim to help secure a future for them. The state school system, he says, has a long history of failing Māori.
But knowing past history of the way things have been done in the state schools, it's very difficult to think there's going to be any difference than the intergenerational failure rate that Maori are experiencing in state schools.
Roana Bennett is the General Manager of Te Taumata o Ngāti Whakaue Trust, which runs Te Rangi Haka Haka, a Rotorua charter school which opened at the start of the year. Less than a month after it opened, Education Minister Chris Hipkins announced all charter schools would have to close by the end of the year unless they succeeded in joining the state system. Ms Bennett says that's had a destabilising impact on her school.
We've certainly had to put a great deal of time, effort, energy into working out what that means for us and to ensuring that our school will remain open from 2019 onwards.
Ms Bennett says the school, which has a roll of 84 students, has applied to become a designated character school. However, she sees no value in being forced back into the state school system.
We think that there is value in the partnership school kura haurua model, and that time should be taken to investigate that further.
Are you confident that will happen?
Well, it's not happening, and I think that's why Sir Toby and Dame Iritana have taken this claim.
Chris Hipkins doesn't accept claims the government has ridden roughshod over Maori when it comes to charter schools.
No, I don't accept that. We were very clear from the moment the charter school legislation, in fact, was first mooted before charter schools were even introduced, that was a policy that we were opposed to and that we would repeal it.
Chris Hipkins says the government isn't satisfied with the success of Maori in state schools, but a private charter school model isn't the answer.
So we've got a number of things that we're working on around improving the education for all Māori students, not just a handful of them who might be going to a private charter school.
Acting Prime Minister Winston Peters is clear on his stance on charter schools.
And the reality is we do not advance the cause of Maori education by separatist, race-based education, but by giving the best that's available in this country.
All 11 charter schools have been given the option of applying to become a designated character school, but so far only Albany's Vanguard Military School in Auckland has had its application approved. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton aho.
4 minutes to 6, lots of discussions on this subject throughout the day. Politicians having a beef with Air New Zealand over its promotion of the plant patty Impossible burger. They claim the national carrier is cutting farmers' lunch by promoting a meat-free product that has the potential to threaten New Zealand's $9 billion red meat sector. Our political reporter Gia Garrick, we believe she's a meat eater, filed this report.
I'm utterly opposed to fake beef.
The acting Prime Minister, Winston Peters, says he wouldn't eat a burger with lab-made meat, particularly if there's one with the real thing available.
Air New Zealand is an airline that was built by the New Zealand taxpayer, that was privatised, was bailed out by the New Zealand taxpayer, is there because of the New Zealand taxpayer, and one of the New Zealand taxpayers are the farming industries who want to ensure they get the top end of the product market offshore, and our airline should be its #1 marketer.
New Zealand First has called Air New Zealand's promotion of the synthetic protein Impossible burger a slap in the face to New Zealand's red meat sector. MP and Southland farmer Mark Patterson says he feels personally affronted by the campaign.
Well, it's a bit tone deaf from Air New Zealand. They're promoting in an unprecedented manner a foreign company who's developing a product that's a real threat to the $9 billion red meat sector, which the regions, of course, are really reliant on. And it goes against their charter and their guiding principles that said they'll support New Zealand companies.
The Impossible burger concept is an American one, the fake meat created in a lab by a US company in Silicon Valley. It's sold in almost 2,500 restaurants over there. Air New Zealand is now promoting it as an option for business premier customers on its flights from Los Angeles to Auckland. In a statement, the airline says it's offered beef and lamb burgers on that same menu since 2011, serving enough to feed the equivalent of every resident in Christchurch and Hamilton during that time. And it says it spends more than $1 million each year on New Zealand beef and lamb for its in-flight meals. Even though the carrier is known for its quirky ad campaigns, the head of Beef and Lamb New Zealand, Rod Slater, says rural New Zealand will feel slighted by this one.
If I was a farmer working day and night with millions of dollars invested in up to my eyes in debt, not even up to my eyes in debt, just dealing with the situation, I'd actually be pretty upset, and I actually would feel very much let down by our national carrier.
National's agriculture spokesman Nathan Guy joined New Zealand First in expressing disappointment, saying our GMO and hormone-free steak and lamb are the most delicious in the world and the airline should promote that. The Greens, however, say a move away from eating so much meat will ultimately be a huge plus for the planet, as it will help cut emissions, lead to less intensive farming and improve animal welfare. While the Agriculture Minister, Damien O'Connor, has a different view on the matter entirely.
Customers will ultimately make the decision whether they like this burger
In fact, it may be a really good positive thing for the meat industry if people taste it, don't like it and eat real meat.
Good or bad for New Zealand, there's one thing they all agree on. Lab-created meat is a product the real meat sector will soon have to learn to live with. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Gia Garrick.
So much feedback from MSD. This from Anne, who is a retired community rep on Benefits Review Committee. She assures us WINZ accepts anonymous calls for benefit fraud frequently, and in review hearings it often became obvious ex-partner made the call, but WINZ discounted it. Heavily weighed in department's favour, says Anne. We are receiving so much feedback from people along these lines, saying that they have had the experience of their former partner dobbing them into WINZ and they hadn't been doing anything wrong. It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Bat in Aho. Almost 6,000 people have registered their interest in the government's Kiwi Build scheme. The government has today released the eligibility criteria for those wanting a Kiwi Build home, allowing couples who earn a combined $180,000 per year and single people who earn up to $120,000 per year to sign up. Sophia Duckle-Jones reports.
Within hours of the announcement, more than 1,000 people had registered their interest in the scheme, and by 12:30 this afternoon the number had climbed to 2,800. It's been rising steadily through the afternoon. Kiwi Build maximum house prices will vary around the country. In hotspots like Auckland and Queenstown, the maximum for a 3-bed will be $650,000, while in the rest of the country it'll be $500,000. Some people in the region spoken to by Radio New Zealand say the income caps are enough to put mortgages on 2 homes, and they are questioning whether the criteria is too broad. Ko Sophia Duckle-Jones, Aho.
A prominent lawyer says the government is wasting money and needlessly putting strain on beneficiaries in the way it runs its benefits fraud reporting line. Figures obtained by Checkpoint under the Official Information Act show the Ministry of Social Development receives around 9,000 allegations of benefit fraud each year, or about 1 every hour. Of the 9,000, around 2/3 are investigated, and in 20% of cases, an overpayment that needs to be paid back is identified. Francis Joychild QC says this means more than 4,000 people are needlessly investigated.
So many resources being put into people with a gripe about anything, dobbing in these vulnerable people and subjecting them to the misery of an MSD benefit fraud investigation.
Francis Joychild QC. MSD is refusing to say whether it checks the motives behind allegations of fraud, despite a recent case which took 8.5 years to resolve, involving a woman who was wrongly accused by an abusive ex-partner. Rescue teams in northern Thailand are giving crash courses in swimming and diving as part of preparations to get 12 schoolboys and their soccer coach out of a deep cave network. The group was found yesterday perched on a ledge surrounded by floodwaters. They'd been missing for more than 9 days. Ben Raymenon, a diver involved in the search, told Checkpoint that the boys have gone through a lot.
Luckily, the coach in the end had some sense and stayed them together in the dry and conserved the energy. And that saved him in the end, because 10 days, no food, no light, just some water dripping from the walls, and huddled together in a pile of mud.
Ben Raymenon, a team of divers, medics, counsellors and Thai Navy SEALs are with the schoolboys, providing medicines and food as experts assess the conditions for getting them out. The government is moving to dismiss the council of the country's largest polytechnic as it faces further big losses. The Tertiary Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says Unitec is in extreme financial difficulty and needs urgent assistance. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
Chris Hipkins says Unitec is expected to make deficits of $19 million this year and $27 million next year. That's on top of losses totalling $50 million over the past 2 years. Unitec's managers have blamed its problems on declining school leaver numbers, but staff have pointed the finger at poor management decisions. Now the Tertiary Education Commission has started 5 days of consultation about replacing Unitec's council with a commissioner. Chris Hipkins says the commissioner may be needed to give the government stronger oversight of Unitec's operations. Ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
Beef and Lamb New Zealand says farmers have a right to be disappointed in the latest Air New Zealand campaign. The airline is promoting the Impossible Burger on its business premier menu, a fake meat burger created by a US company in Silicon Valley. New Zealand First says it's a slap in the face for the country's $9 billion red meat industry. Beef and Lamb Chief Executive Rod Slater says Air New Zealand is known for its quirky ad campaigns, but he understands the disappointment about this one from rural New Zealand. He says a farmer working day and night with millions of dollars invested and potentially up to his eyes in debt would feel pretty upset and let down by the national carrier. The Acting Prime Minister Winston Peters says charter schools are not the answer to improving Maori education. His comments come in the face of a Treaty of Waitangi claim which says the closure of charter schools is a breach of the treaty. Mr Peters wouldn't comment on the claim but said charter schools are not the solution to raising educational outcomes for Maori.
And the reality is we do not advance the cause of Maori education by separatist, race-based education, but by giving the best that's available in this country.
Winston Peters. So far, only Vanguard Military School in Auckland has had its application approved to transition from a charter school back into the state system. Malaysia's former Prime Minister Najib Razak has pleaded not guilty to charges laid against him over a multi-million-dollar corruption scandal. The charges were connected to billions of dollars that went missing from a government-controlled fund when he was in power. The ABC's David Lipson reports.
The former Prime Minister was led through a throng of reporters into court where he was charged with 3 counts of criminal breach of trust and 1 count of using his position for gratification. The case will focus on $14 million funnelled into Najib's bank account through SRC International, a subsidiary of the corrupted 1MDB Infrastructure Fund. He's now due to face a bail hearing. Overnight, he posted a pre-recorded video on social media admitting he wasn't perfect but claiming the allegations weren't true.
The ABC's David Lipson reporting. It's 6:06. In sport, the All Blacks captain Kieran Reid will return to the Crusaders lineup for their Super Rugby match against the Highlanders on Friday after recovering from back surgery. Reid had surgery late last year to correct a bulging disc in his back that was causing chronic leg pain. He played a warm-up match for Counties Manukau last week and has been named at number 8 in the Crusaders' starting lineup at Rugby League Park, which has been temporarily renamed Wyatt Crockett Stadium in honour of the loosehead prop he'll play in his 200th Super Rugby match. The New Zealand tennis player Michael Venus is adamant he won't be intimidated when he takes the court against former champion Leighton Hewitt in the first round of the men's doubles tonight at Wimbledon. Venus and his partner Raven Klaasen play the Australian and his compatriot Alex Bolt overnight. Hewitt's first Grand Slam win came at Wimbledon back in 2002 in the men's singles, but Venus isn't fretting about playing the former champ.
The good thing is we played him just a couple of weeks ago on the grass, and we'd actually played him on the clay earlier, so know what to expect. So there's none of that uncertainty, I guess, going out there. So no, it's just a matter of going out there and executing and playing well.
Michael Venus. The Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic are hoping their late surge of success in the ANZ Premiership will be enough to qualify them for the upcoming playoffs. The Magic currently sit in the top 4, but a win tonight in Auckland against the Northern Stars, who have had just 1 win this season, would further enhance their bid for a top 3 playoff berth. That's the news.
Thai rescue hits snags.
Brilliant news, that they've been found alive and they're okay. Then you pause for thought for a moment and think, yeah, now what?
Primary school teachers to strike.
We're currently in a teacher shortage that has our system at crisis.
Council nails treehouse.
It's a little bit over the top, to be honest. Everyone I've ever spoken to is just in disbelief about the whole thing. Everyone says, look, it's a treehouse, the kids, leave them alone.
Hitting the right notes. Morning Report with Guy Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the number of schools refusing to take part in the HPV vaccination program. And after 10, the real-life Jurassic World. Toril Kornfeld reports on the men and women working to bring back extinct species. Join me, Lynn Freeman, and for Catherine Ryan after Morning Report on RNZ National.
It's service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland mainly fine but cloudy periods and the odd shower about the west coast. Waikato to Kapiti, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty and the central high country, fine apart from areas of morning fog. Overnight frosts in sheltered places. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington fine today, cloudy periods tomorrow with a few light showers about Gisborne and northern Hawke's Bay. The Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and North Otago fine today, mostly cloudy tomorrow. Bulla and Westland mainly fine, occasional rain or drizzle developing tomorrow. Central Otago, Dunedin, Clutha and Southland often cloudy with some rain or showers at times. Fiordland, periods of rain, excuse me, and the Chatham Islands a few showers more frequent for a time tomorrow with southwest gales. It's 6:09 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. We're just going to stay with the news for a bit longer. This is breaking news, came in just before 6. It's worth repeating this detail. This information. A man has died in police custody 3 days after he was tasered and restrained by police. Superintendent Karen Malthus, the Auckland City District Commander, says the male offender had smashed a car window of a parked car on Sunday and was observed kicking an elderly victim in the head several times as the elderly person lay unconscious. She says officers were unable to reach the unconscious victim as the offender was blocking them from attending to him. Their repeated commands were ignored, the police say, and the offender lunged towards them before he was tasered multiple times. During the arrest process, the offender violently struggled, which required 2 more backup officers to assist to apply necessary restraints and a spit hood. The offender was restrained. Police staff attended to the elderly victim until paramedics arrived and he was taken to hospital where he remains in a serious condition but is recovering from the violent assault. The offender was transported to the Auckland Police Custody Unit in an agitated state and continued resisting police efforts to remove restraints. The offender's condition began to deteriorate while in custody and police were required to perform CPR until an ambulance arrived. He was taken to hospital where he passed away this morning. Police, and this is just their version of events, we haven't heard this from anyone else, this is from a police statement. Police have referred the incident to the coroner, WorkSafe New Zealand and the Independent Police Conduct Authority. The incident was on Sunday, the person died this morning. It's 6:11. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. The children's football team trapped in caves in Thailand have now been given food, medical supplies and hope. But the 12 boys and their coach who were trapped in the flooded cave, well, the flooding's beneath, unfortunately, may have to stay for some time, possibly even months. To get out sooner, many of them will have to be taught how to scuba dive. Many of them can't even swim. Or they wait for floodwaters to drop. But with months of monsoon rains about to begin, there is concern levels could rise and threaten the air pocket where they've taken refuge. Wrapped in emergency blankets, they joke with the divers who are staying with them until they can be brought out. The BBC's Libo De Seco reports.
Smiles and hellos as some of the 12 boys who'd been missing in these caves give a traditional Thai greeting, say their nicknames, and we are in good health. With them, a Thai Navy SEAL who tells them that the whole world has been following their story. There's even a moment of laughter as one of the boys says he was forgotten in the round of introductions. Watching on a monitor outside the cave's entrance, their mums.
I'm so glad he is still alive and safe. I'm speechless. I want to thank everyone who helped. Thank you very much.
I am dying to see him. I miss my son.
But getting the 12 boys and their coach out won't be easy. For one thing, none of the boys can swim. And the dark passages flooded with water are so narrow in parts they'd have to go through one by one. The boys may need to learn to dive or have to wait up to 4 months for the flooding to go down. Water is being pumped out to try and stop levels from rising. And the local governors say they won't rush to get the boys out. What's more important is taking a zero-risk strategy. But even as authorities weigh their options, more rain is expected within the coming days. So whilst there's been much to celebrate, it's also clear there's much work ahead.
That report from the BBC. CNN's correspondent at the entrance to the caves is Anna Corrin. She told me a short time ago it is now a race against the monsoon rains to get the boys out.
I really am getting a sense of urgency here at the staging site in Chiang Rai. The reason I say that is that there seems to be a push to get these boys out as soon as possible. Yes, there is no rush insofar as the boys are healthy. No one needs to be evacuated. We have seen this dramatic video in the last few hours released by the Thai Navy SEALs, and it's just incredible. These boys, they're smiling, they're introducing themselves. They say, in their own words that they are healthy, but you can see how gaunt they are, how pale their skin is. They are severely malnourished. But it would seem, John, having just listened to the governor address the media here, that they are going to throw everything at bringing them out of the cave by means of placing these full-face oxygen masks on them and leading them, guiding them through via these Navy SEALs. Look, it's not going to be an easy job whatsoever. We know that parts of this cave system, are still very much flooded. But this is what is the focus now. They've suspended the drilling operation above the cave. Everything is being now thrown at these Navy SEALs, bringing these boys out. And we heard from the governor that they're practicing breathing through these full-face oxygen masks, which is certainly encouraging. He also said that they'll probably be staggered, depending on their health, depending on their condition. So, some boys may have to stay inside a little bit longer. But, we could see real developments here in the next few days, John.
And I guess it's a bit of a lose-lose, isn't it? Because if they decide to be cautious, they run the real risk of the area where the boys are currently safe being flooded during the rainy season. And so they have to prepare to get them out, don't they? They have to be ready to get them out in case the waters begin to rise.
I really think it's the only option. And I think the more time that we spend here on the ground, you realise that they are racing against the clock. We've had a break in the weather. The sun is shining today. But we are expecting a change in the next few days. And we are in the midst of the monsoon season here in Thailand. That means that it will just pour, these torrential downpours, and through that there is this massive flash flooding, and that flash flooding affects the cave. So they don't want to have the water rise once again. They have drained millions and millions of litres from these caves thus far. Something like hundreds of thousands of litres every single hour. If they allow the storms to happen and they haven't moved these boys, then there is going to be more flooding in the cave and potentially cutting them off even more so, which would be very, very problematic. So I think that the sense is, John, that they need to act, and they need to act now.
It's Anna Corrin from CNN, who is there. Extraordinary state of affairs. Finding them was only half the job done, wasn't it? A remarkable half, but boy, there is a lot more work yet to be done. 6:17 within hours of this morning's Kiwi Build announcement, thousands of New Zealanders were registering their interest in the first home buyer scheme. Housing Minister Phil Twyford announced the eligibility criteria today. We've heard them, but they include an income cap of $120,000 a year for single people, $180,000 for couples. Kiwi Build maximum house prices will vary around the country. In the most expensive markets like Auckland and Queenstown, the maximum for a 3-bedroom be $650,000, while in the rest of the country it will be $500,000. It's a welcome announcement for many, but some question if the criteria is too broad. Sophia Duckor-Jones reports.
Scout Barbara Evans is a student in Dunedin and is expecting her first child. She says the criteria has given her a better hope about buying her first home with her partner.
I'm pregnant with my first child at the moment, and I would really love to have a warm, dry and safe home that we could be living in. I just don't know if it's a possibility yet.
But she says while the threshold is good for Aucklanders, it's unfair for those like herself and her partner who are on the lower side of the income cap, living in a cheaper city.
In Dunedin, where, you could get a mortgage on probably 2 houses for that amount. It's a bit of a sting, and I think they should have been looking at on an individual level in the regions as to what that baseline should be.
She also says when she went to register this morning, she was surprised there weren't more questions around eligibility.
I was expecting a question about maybe how many dependent children you have or whether you have disability needs or that sort of thing that are really important to consider when going for housing. But instead it was just how many bedrooms would you like and where would you be interested in being put in the ballot for.
Nicole is studying medicine in Auckland and says previously her only hopes of buying a home was outside Auckland, which she says wasn't an ideal situation. She says she's likely to sign up in the next few years for the Kiwi Build scheme, but expects it'll be a decade or more before she's a homeowner.
Absolutely, yeah. I think my goal would probably to buy in Auckland in the next, say, 15 years worth of saving, rather than the next, mid-term 5 to 10 year goal.
The First Home Buyers Club advises people how to get on the property ladder. Its spokesperson, Leslie Harris, says she supports the scheme and thinks the threshold is good, at least for Aucklanders. However, she says questions remain over bank lending rules and mortgages.
Well, in order to service even a $500,000 lending at this point, the income level for that would need to be at around about the $115,000 mark. So there's a clear disparity in terms of what banks will actually lend to and what people can actually service.
Those registered will get regular updates on the Kiwi Build program, including when homes are made available. They will then have to go through a pre-qualification process to determine their eligibility. Once eligible, they will be able to enter a ballot system which will decide who gets to purchase the homes. 1,000 homes are expected to be built this year, and already within the first 2 hours of the announcement, 1,100 people had registered for the scheme. By lunchtime today, that number had increased to 2,800. For Checkpoint, Sophia Rako-Jones.
Let's return to the Ministry of Social Development, MSD, a somewhat different subject, sort of. The MSD says it treats beneficiaries and pensioners the same when it comes to wiping debts generated by accidental overpayments. Newly released Official Information Act figures show the government writes off 3 times as much pensioner debt as it does debts accrued by beneficiaries when they're mistakenly overpaid. But MSD says there are good reasons for that. Anusha Bradley reports.
Last year, the Ministry of Social Development wrongly paid $168 million to beneficiaries, creating debts that have to be paid back. It wiped 0.5% of those debts. In comparison, MSD wrote off 1.7% of the $38 million overpaid to those receiving NZ Super. The trend over the last 5 years shows super debts are wiped at roughly 3 times the rate of benefit debts. The Ministry's Deputy Chief Executive of Service Delivery, Viv Rickard, says he's not at all surprised.
There'll be times when we write off debt when people have died, right? Because of the nature of the people that are receiving super, government super or pensioners, unfortunately a lot of them fit into that category.
The Ministry couldn't say how often it writes off debt due to death, but Viv Rickard says MSD treats everyone the same.
What I can say is that on 98% of the time or thereabouts, we will seek to get the debt back. So if we've owed money on, if the government's owed money by people, we will seek to get it back, and that's applied consistently to both people on pensions and our people on benefit.
A beneficiary advocate says superannuitants are more likely to get overpayment debts wiped because they're more likely to challenge mistakes made by the Ministry of Social Development. Kay Brereton is the spokesperson for the National Beneficiary Advocacy Consultancy Group.
Superannuitants are, generally speaking, people who've got a lot of life experience, and they know how to fight back when things seem wrong. So I wonder if more often superannuitants are actually challenging incorrect debts and getting them written off.
Kay Brereton believes beneficiaries are treated differently to pensioners.
Pensioners are kind of seen as deserving, and they do get a better treatment. And if you talk to someone who's been on benefit and then transferred to pension, that's definitely their experience, is that suddenly they've got a different waiting area, they've got dedicated case managers, and they are treated differently, better.
Viv Ricard admits that's often the perception and says MSD is working hard to ensure it's an organisation that cares about all its clients. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
24 minutes past 6 was not quite. If you're going to make a complaint to the Broadcasting Standards Authority, it's 10 seconds before being 24 minutes past 6. We're getting an enormous amount of feedback on MSD tonight, and much of it is saying that people who have been investigated were victims of cynical, vexatious, bullying complaints by ex-partners. So we're going to call some of you and follow that up. Thank you. And we're getting a lot of feedback around vegetarians and the meatless patties being served on some Air New Zealand flights and business class, I think. Hi, John. It's time that vegetarians are respected with other choices for their meals. This is a storm in a teacup. Farmers always grizzle, regardless. Actually, I think it was politicians who were grizzling today, wasn't it? I've sort of... The main grizzlers I heard were in Parliament, and then lots of emails on this subject too. For heaven's sake, rural New Zealand, says Alex, plant protein and lab-produced meat products are the future, and farmers need to get with the program instead of playing the poor us card once again. If they can't stand the emerging competition, then, in my opinion, IMO, they need to be reconsidering their choices. It would do the planet and the farmed animals a favour. And Ellen says, good evening. Pleased to hear the Lamb and Beef Focus saying a farmers are right to be weepy and sad about non-meat meat being promoted by Air New Zealand. I wonder if the forestry people are likewise bitter because the new Dreamliners aren't made of pine. And we have a thing called Cooking with John, which is people who tweet in pictures of their meals. We have a couple of regulars, and there have been some new additions tonight, vegetarian meals. So I think people might be fighting a losing argument on that one. Thank you for your feedback. We really appreciate it. Let's head back to the rural community, though, as farmers, MPI and the government work to contain the spread of Mycoplasma bovis. Farming communities are making adjustments large and small. Calves at school pet days, for example. The famous AMP shows with their competitions at all age levels for best calf, best bull, first prize a ribbon or something much more valuable in reputational terms if you're a breeder, for example. Much of that is going on hold, and for many it's the first time a disease has so directly shaped one of the biggest days on the rural social calendar. And I guess it's the business calendar too, AMP shows. Conan Young reports.
The 5-star prefer the marbling of the Angus animals so that they are worth a premium.
Trevor Hobson shows me some of the Angus cows on his mid-Canterbury farm, cows he's keen to protect from the ravages of Mycoplasma bovis. As president of the Ellesmere AMP show, he and other committee members have made the difficult decision to cancel the cattle section this year to prevent animals with undetected M. bovis from coming into contact with some of the country's most valuable stock.
A lot of these bloodlines have been going on for generations, and so if you got a directive to have them all slaughtered, it would be pretty devastating.
Trevor Hobson says it's the first time he can recall cattle not being part of the October show, which is the most important day of the year for farmers in the district.
We are the first spring show in Canterbury. People have been very busy all spring with calving and lambing, and it's actually a nice day out for these people to have when the pressure comes off a bit and they can actually have a day out and catch up with all the local people again.
A lot of work goes into preparing stock for the show, which is often used as a way for breeders to market their bulls.
Oh, there's a bit of competition there, which is all good healthy stuff. It's an opportunity to showcase what people have got, and they are ultimately, a lot of these people are stud breeders and they're looking to sell bulls as a result, and this is basically a showcase for their businesses.
Ellesmere joins the Ashburton, Southland and Mackenzie shows in cancelling its cattle section this year. All of these districts are home to M. bovis infected farms. The president of the Ashburton show, David Butterick, says the risk was a child showing a calf might struggle to keep it away from others on show and inadvertently spread the disease.
We were a bit disappointed. We had thought that possibly we could run something if precautions were taken, but people who was running it decided that the risk was still too much.
Even in the Manawa too, where so far only one farm has been declared to be infected, the children's calf and lamb show, known as Championship Day, has decided to cancel its calf section. Involving 23 schools, the competition has taken place every year since 1930, and this will be the first year calves have not been welcome. The president of the Manawatu Oroa Boys and Girls Agricultural Club, Judy Driscoll, says it's a quintessential part of growing up in the region.
It's a really big commitment for them from July right through to November, because these children pick their animals quite often in these coming holidays. Some children, they have a name first and then they go and find the animal to suit that name, or, it's just amazing.
But she says the risk of an infected calf helping to spread M. bovis was just not worth taking.
It is very sad, and some schools take it very seriously, and, they do the diaries at school, and, it's part of their daily commitment at school as well.
The Rangiora and South Canterbury shows have yet to decide if they will include cattle in this year's program. The iconic Canterbury AMP show, one of the biggest in the country, declined to comment. In Ōtautahi for Checkpoint, ko Conan Young Tēnei.
Thanks, Conan. That's the end of the show for this evening. We've received somebody texting in, saying, "Oi, can you close the show with a few secs of Calf Club Day by the Top Twins? It makes me cry every time." Says Tanya, we can't because we don't have access to music here. However, I've got access to the computer, and so hold on a second. I'm going to hold my mic to the really tinny speaker, and this is a first for Radio New Zealand, a new low really in the history of Radio New Zealand as a multimedia entity. And here we go, Tanya, just for you. Here are a few bars. Listen. Can you hear that? Can we hear that? That's for you, Tanya. Have a good night, everyone. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Almost 6,000 people have registered interest in the Kiwi Build scheme on the day the government released its eligibility criteria. The lawyer for a woman wrongly accused of benefit fraud says the MSD reporting line is a waste of money and puts unnecessary strain on beneficiaries. A man has died in police custody in Auckland after being tasered, restrained and put in a spit hood during an arrest on Sunday. The government is considering installing a commissioner to replace the Council of Unitec, the country's largest polytechnic, which faces multi-million-dollar losses. Rescue teams in Thailand are giving the 12 schoolboys trapped in a cave complex crash, swimming and scuba diving lessons to prepare